I couldn't forgive him, and I didn't want to. The lie had been too quiet, too careful, too practiced. It was tucked inside the way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he said working late with such rehearsed ease that even the dog stopped bothering to wait at the door. It was a Tuesday night in mid-November, cold enough to make the windows sweat. I came home after a long day at the clinic, my body aching from 12 hours on my feet. My scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic, and my hair was pulled into a tired bun that had been falling apart since lunch. I had stopped by the market on the way back, picked up the good olive oil, fresh parsley, and a soft wedge of brie he always liked. I made his favorite pasta, the one I used to mess up when we were first dating, back when he used to laugh about how terrible I was at cooking, back when he used to sit on the counter, swinging his legs and pretending to help. Now the kitchen was quiet. He wasn't home. Just a text. Working late. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen. 5 words. Not even a period. Like a message you'd send a colleague. There was nothing warm about it. No trace of affection. Just distance. I set the phone down carefully, like it might break. Like I might. Then I plated the food anyway. 1 plate for me, 1 for the man I had loved for nearly a decade. The man who had begun to disappear not all at once, but in tiny, daily fragments. A missing kiss. A forgotten question. The way his eyes stopped meeting mine at breakfast. I sat at the table alone. The candles flickered against the window pane, reflecting a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. A woman who had worked 2 jobs to support his business in its early days. A woman who had memorized the name of every client he ever mentioned, who packed his lunches with little notes, who gave up a promotion because the timing didn't work for both of us. And now I was just a placeholder. The resentment lived in my chest like a bruise that wouldn't fade. It flared every time I heard his footsteps in the hall, every time he smiled at his phone but looked away when I entered the room. I didn't want to admit it out loud, but something inside me had already begun to rot. That night, I did something out of character. After clearing the plates, washing the dishes, and folding the throw blanket on the couch, tasks that had become rituals of invisibility, I put on my coat and left. Not to follow him. Not yet. I went to a small shop tucked between a florist and a bakery. It didn't have a sign, just a painted door with a crescent moon etched into the wood. I'd passed it a dozen times. Never thought twice about it. But that night, something pulled me toward it. The bell above the door rang like a whisper. Inside, the air smelled of sandalwood and old books. A woman sat behind a velvet-draped table, her hands folded over a deck of worn tarot cards. She looked up as I entered, her eyes kind but sharp. "You've come with a question," she said, not as a guess, but a fact. I almost laughed. "Don't we all?" She gestured for me to sit. I hesitated, then lowered myself into the chair. The velvet was cool beneath my fingertips. "I don't believe in this," I said quietly. "You don't have to," she replied. "But your heart does. And it's tired of being quiet." She shuffled the cards slowly, with reverence. Then she laid 3 on the table. The moon, the lovers reversed, the tower. My breath caught. She said nothing at first, just looked at the cards, then back at me. "He's hiding something," she said. "And you already know what it is." I didn't speak. "You'll find him," she continued. "But you'll have to choose what to do with what you see." I felt cold all over, like someone had opened a door to a room I'd been avoiding. "Where?" I asked. My voice surprised me. It was steady. She turned over a final card. "A small cafe." I recognized it immediately. We had gone there for our anniversary last year. They made the best French toast in the city. Thursday. Late afternoon. I left the shop with the image burned into my mind. The next day, I watched him more closely. He was overly kind, brought home flowers, made a joke about us needing a vacation. I smiled, nodded, but every word landed on me like salt on a wound. I had started hearing his words differently. "I've got a client meeting at 4. But you're wearing the cologne you save for date nights. Don't wait up." Because you've already made other plans. You're always so quiet lately. Because I stopped pretending I wasn't breaking. It hurt. In that way, only betrayal can. Not like a knife, sharp and quick, but like something dull and grinding, day after day, wearing down the parts of me that used to believe in us. Thursday arrived with gray skies and wind. I left work early, told my assistant I had a headache. Maybe I did. Or maybe it was just the pressure of carrying the secret, this waiting. I parked 2 blocks from the cafe. My hands trembled as I checked the camera, a small one I used for vacations. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. He arrived at 4:12 p.m. Not alone. She was younger. Tall. Perfectly put together in that effortless way that stung more than anything. They didn't touch. Not at first. Just leaned in, smiling too wide, laughing too much. He looked at her like I used to dream he'd look at me again. When she touched his hand across the table, I didn't flinch. I raised the camera. Click. When he leaned closer, his voice low, her eyes soft, I clicked again. It was almost peaceful, watching the truth unfold. Like setting down a heavy box you didn't know you'd been carrying. That night, he came home late. Said the meeting ran long. I nodded. Poured him a glass of wine. He kissed my forehead. I almost laughed. He didn't notice the way I watched him. The way I had stopped asking questions. That was the worst part, maybe, how easy it was for him to lie. I thought of the tarot cards. The tower. Destruction. But also transformation. I didn't cry that night. I sat at my desk with the camera in my lap, and I watched the footage. Not to punish myself, but to remember, to confirm. I needed to know that I wasn't imagining it. That my gut, the thing he always dismissed, had been right all along. I made a folder. Named it Proof. Backed it up twice. Then I opened a new browser tab and typed the name of the law firm I'd seen advertised on the subway. Female-owned. Discreet. Aggressive. I booked a consultation. I was tired of being the one who waited. Tired of holding a marriage together while he played house with someone else. Tired of silencing the part of me that whispered, "You deserve more than this." The resentment wasn't rage. It wasn't explosive. It was cold, methodical, clear. It had been building for years. Not just from the affair, but from every moment I was made to feel like my loyalty was an expectation, not a gift. Like the time he laughed when I said I wanted to go back to school. Why? You already have a job. Or the way he never remembered the name of my supervisor, though I'd spoken about her dozens of times. Or how he'd scroll on his phone during dinner, then accuse me of being distant. 1,000 little cuts. And now, finally, one clean break. He would never see it coming. That was the beauty of it. I wasn't loud. I wasn't dramatic. I was just done. And sometimes, silence is the loudest sound of all. I went to sleep that night with a strange calm in my chest. Tomorrow, I would begin again. Not as his wife. As the woman he never thought would walk away, until she did. I didn't sleep much the night after I caught him. Not because I was sad, that part had already passed. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even angry. I just kept seeing the way he looked at her. That smile. That casual touch. That unburdened version of him that I hadn't seen in years. It felt like watching someone else live my life. Someone softer. Someone less exhausted from trying. I got up before the sun. Made coffee I didn't drink. Sat on the couch and stared at nothing in particular. The house felt colder than usual, but maybe it was just me. Everything inside me had turned quiet, like the world after a snowstorm. When he came into the kitchen that morning, he was humming. That was the first crack. I didn't realize how deeply it would cut until later, but that soft, tuneless hum, like he was at peace, lodged itself in my throat. He kissed my cheek. Asked if I wanted anything from the store. I wanted to ask if he remembered the last time he had really looked at me. Instead, I said no. I'm fine. And the way he smiled, so unbothered, so unaware, made something inside me close completely. At work, I went through the motions. Smiling, nodding, documenting cases. My hands were steady, my voice clear, but my mind was 100 miles away. I kept replaying things he'd said, things I had brushed off before. "You're too intense." When I asked him why he didn't call the night he said he would, "It's just dinner." "I don't know why you're making a big deal." When he canceled our anniversary for a client emergency. "You always assume the worst." When I asked why his location suddenly stopped updating. Each phrase peeled back another layer. Each one was a mirror reflecting how little I had asked for, and how much even that had cost me. That night, he brought me dessert. A slice of lemon cake from the place we used to love. I stared at the white box like it was a gift from a stranger. He said, "Saw it and thought of you." And that simple sentence made me ache. Because what version of me did he think of? The one who waited up with candles and pasta? The one who folded his laundry just how he liked it? Or the one who never questioned, never confronted, never made a scene? He didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe he never really had. Friday, I met with the lawyer. Her name was Marla. She had eyes like polished steel and a voice that didn't waver. She listened, asked a few sharp questions, took notes in brisk, precise strokes. When I showed her the photos, she didn't gasp or flinch, just nodded slowly, then said, "You're going to be fine." "He's not." That was the first moment I felt something close to relief. Not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I finally knew someone was going to help me stop letting him destroy me. She explained the process. Separation. Asset division. Strategic silence. "You've been financing his lifestyle?" I nodded. "Let's make sure that stops." Her certainty was a balm. I left her office with a folder in my bag and a plan in my mind. That weekend, he suggested a movie night. It almost made me laugh. He was trying. But it wasn't for me. It was for the image of us. "Want to rewatch the one we saw in Paris?" he asked. I wanted to ask if he remembered how quiet I was on that trip. How I cried in the hotel bathroom because he spent more time texting than looking at me. But I just said, sure. During the movie, he reached for my hand. I let him. Because in that moment, I wasn't his wife. I was a witness. Collecting every moment, every word, every small act of pretend affection, storing it like evidence. Not for court. For myself. For the part of me that still occasionally whispered, "Maybe you misunderstood." By Sunday, I had moved some of my personal belongings into storage. Quietly. Deliberately. He didn't notice the missing books. The spare keys. The framed photos that had once sat on my desk. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't looking. Not really. And why would he? I'd taught him I would always be there. That I'd wait, forgive, adjust. That I'd contort myself into smaller shapes just to fit beside him. But not anymore. On Monday, he was annoyed. He couldn't find the charger I always kept in his drawer. The socks I'd just bought were missing. I told him I'd reorganized some things. "You didn't tell me," he said, frowning. I shrugged. "Didn't think you'd notice." He didn't reply. Just grunted and left for work. I stood in the doorway after the door clicked shut and I whispered, "Exactly." By Tuesday, I had transferred half of our savings to a private account in my name. It wasn't vindictive. It was protective. I had been the one building that account for years. And I wasn't going to let it fund his second life. I stared at the transfer confirmation screen for a long time. Not with guilt. With clarity. He'd once said, "We're a team." But the scoreboard had always been tilted. I carried the weight. He took the credit. The late-night budgeting. The grocery lists. The planning of birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners. All me. He just showed up. Every word he said that week, I dissected. Every "love you" sounded like punctuation, not feeling. Every joke was a rerun of the same old charm. I knew the script now. "You seem different lately," he said one night. I looked at him and smiled. "Do I?" He watched me for a moment, then went back to his phone. On Thursday, 1 week after the cafe, I received an email from Marla. Papers were ready. All she needed was my signature. And so I printed them. Sat at the same table where I once folded his clothes, where I once wrote him notes with hearts in the margins. I signed my name. Neat. Clear. Steady. Not because I was happy. Not because it didn't hurt. But because I was done being the only one holding on. That night, he came home to a quiet house. The wine was on the table. The envelope beside it. I had written a single line. You taught me how to disappear. I just finally listened. And I walked out. Into the cold. Into the silence. Into myself. Snow fell that night, soft and quiet, like the sky itself was trying to erase everything. I didn't go far, just enough to breathe. A small hotel on the edge of town, the kind with thin walls and scratchy towels, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could exhale. I lay on the bed and listened to the radiator hum. Outside, the world blurred in white, but inside, something sharpened. The stillness didn't scare me. It studied me. No phone calls. No questions. Just the weight of my own presence. Finally, I was the only voice in the room. By morning, he had texted 3 times. Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me. I read them all, then put the phone face down. Let him sit in the uncertainty for once. Let him feel what I had felt, week after week, year after year, that gnawing silence, the sense that something important was slipping away and you were helpless to stop it. He called. I didn't answer. I watched the screen go dark over and over. It was strange how quiet revenge could be. Later that day, Marla called. Her tone was brisk. He's already contacted a lawyer. I felt my stomach twist, not with fear, but with bitter predictability. Of course he did, I said. What did they say? They're pushing for mediation. He thinks this can be smoothed over. I laughed, and it didn't sound like me. He doesn't understand yet. No, she agreed. But he will. 2 days passed. Then 3. I stayed in that little hotel, paid by the week. I read books. I took long showers. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the ache to rise, the grief, the regret, but it didn't come. What came instead were memories. Not the good ones. The ones I had buried. Like the first time he made me feel small in front of friends, a joke about how long I took to get ready. Everyone laughed. I did too, but I remember how my cheeks burned. He'd squeezed my leg under the table, like I was supposed to find it endearing. Like I should be flattered to be the punchline. Or the time I cried quietly in the car because we'd driven past the gallery I loved, and he hadn't noticed. I'd hinted 3 times that I wanted to stop. He just kept driving, talking about a new marketing strategy. I nodded, smiled, swallowed the lump in my throat. I remembered the day I told him I'd gotten a bonus at work, a real one, a milestone, and he had said, finally. Took them long enough. Not congratulations. Not even a smile. Just that dismissive shrug that made me feel like no accomplishment was ever truly mine. Little things. Always the little things. The way he never said thank you when I brought him coffee in the morning. The way he forgot I hated mushrooms after years of meals together. The way he once said, "You don't really have hobbies, do you?" I did. He just never noticed. By the end of the week, I had stopped checking my phone entirely. That silence he used to weaponize against me, I had reclaimed it. Marla filed the papers officially. She texted me a confirmation. It's done. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not because I missed him, but because I had mourned the marriage alone for so long, and now it was officially over. It felt like the funeral of something that had already died 1,000 quiet deaths. The next morning, I went back to the house. Not to see him. To collect what was mine. He was there. Of course he was. He stood in the doorway, his face drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept. I walked past him without speaking. Natalie, he said. I turned. Just my name. That was all he had to offer. I waited. Nothing else came. So I said, I need to pack. He followed me to the bedroom. Watched as I folded sweaters, wrapped picture frames in towels, unplugged the lamp I'd bought from the flea market downtown. "That's yours," he asked, gesturing to the lamp. I looked at him. "You never noticed it." "Of course it's mine." He blinked. Like he didn't understand. Like the version of me that existed outside of our shared life was foreign to him. I kept packing. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I had felt everything alone for so long. "What did she tell you?" he asked finally. I didn't need to ask who he meant. I turned to face him, slowly. "Enough." He ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't serious. A familiar bitterness rose in my throat. It was enough to lie. Enough to keep secrets. That's serious to me. He looked away. "I don't even know what I was looking for," he said quietly. And that line made me feel the sharpest resentment of all. Because I knew exactly what I had been looking for. Just once, I had wanted him to choose me when no one was watching. Just once, I wanted to be the person he couldn't imagine betraying. But he had made his choice. Not with one action, but with 1,000 quiet ones. The ones he never thought I'd notice. I zipped my suitcase. Walked toward the door. He stood. "Please don't hate me." I paused. Looked him in the eye. "I don't hate you," I said. "That would mean you still had power." Then I left. Back at the hotel, I opened my suitcase and placed the lamp on the nightstand. It looked out of place. So did I. But I was starting to see that as a beginning, not an ending. I made tea. Sat by the window. Let the quiet settle around me like a second skin. It would take time. Healing always does. But the house wasn't my home anymore. He wasn't my anchor. And I wasn't lost. Not anymore. It didn't take long for the silence to break. The first ripple came through a message from his lawyer. Polite, clipped, and full of phrases like mutual understanding and amicable division. They wanted to avoid court. They wanted a conversation. I read the letter once. Then again. And with each line, the old resentment stirred, not like a flame, but like a cold wind. Familiar. I had heard these words before. Not in legal terms, but in his voice in our life. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Translation. "Let me have my way quietly." "You're being emotional." Translation. "Your pain is inconvenient to me. Why can't you just let it go?" Translation. "My comfort is more important than your truth." I forwarded the email to Marla with a single note. "We proceed." That night, the messages started. Not from him directly at first, but from the people who never bothered to ask how I was until now. His sister, who once forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, he's devastated. "You're being so cold." His colleague, who called me his rock at a company event. "This doesn't seem like you. You always supported him." His mother, who once told me I was lucky to have someone so driven. "I don't understand why you're throwing it all away." Each message was a stone, flung through the glass I had finally stepped away from. Each one layered with that same assumption, that my silence had been consent, that my devotion had been submission. I didn't respond to any of them. I saved them. Labeled a folder. Proof of who they really are. Because I wasn't just divorcing him. I was stepping out of a role I had never auditioned for. The role of the forgiver. The enabler. The quiet, reliable partner who cleaned up his messes and smiled at his charm. A week passed. Then he showed up. At the hotel. I heard the knock before I saw him. I knew it was him. I opened the door just enough to see his face, tired, drawn, but still wearing that same look I had grown used to, the one that said he thought I would cave. "Natalie, please." No anger. No apologies. Just a soft voice, meant to disarm. He looked around the hallway. Like he couldn't believe I was really here. Like he had expected me to come home eventually, tail between my legs. "We need to talk." I opened the door a fraction wider, just enough to meet his eyes. "You had years to talk." He shifted, uncomfortable. "This isn't you." And there it was. That line. That deeply cutting, subtly cruel line. "This isn't you." It said, "I liked the version of you that tolerated me. The one who stayed small." "You don't know me," I said. "You never asked to." He blinked. "We can fix this." "I already did," I said. "By leaving." I closed the door. Slowly, quietly, just like he had closed himself off to me for years. That weekend, I drove to my sister's cabin in the mountains. She had always offered, but I had always said no. I was too busy. Or he needed me home. Or we had plans. Always plans that revolved around his schedule. But now I was free. She welcomed me with open arms and hot cocoa. No questions. Just warmth. I hadn't realized how much I missed being around someone who expected nothing from me. As we sat by the fire, she said, "You look different." And for once, I didn't flinch. "I feel different." We didn't talk about him much. Just enough. I told her things in pieces. She listened. Didn't rush to forgive on his behalf. That was another kind of quiet revenge, telling the truth, calmly, without shame. The messages from him turned desperate, then angry, then manipulative. "I gave you everything." But he hadn't. He had taken my time, my youth, my softness. This is breaking me. But I had already been broken. Quietly. Over time. Until there was almost nothing left. I made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. A belief that I would never leave. A certainty that I would always choose peace over truth. And now, the truth was choosing me. He tried to delay proceedings. Claimed confusion over finances. Said he needed time. Marla wasn't surprised. "He's stalling. He's hoping you'll lose momentum." I didn't. Instead, I sat with every document. Every bill. Every shared account that had my name but not my benefit. I highlighted the lines where I had paid. I tagged the receipts he had never seen. I built a case not out of anger, but out of years of proof. He had thought he was clever. That his charm would carry him. But charm is just a mask, and masks don't hold up under scrutiny. In mediation, he avoided my eyes. His lawyer spoke for him. I spoke for myself. And every time I saw his lips tighten, every time he shifted uncomfortably, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was showing him the cost of what he thought would never matter. And he hated it. Not because it was cruel. Because it was fair. When the settlement was finalized, I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. I didn't want revenge in the form of fire. I wanted absence. Accountability. Distance. He had built his comfort on my quiet suffering. And now I was gone. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just gone. And the space I left behind was the loudest thing he'd ever hear. Spring came slowly. One morning I woke to birdsong instead of notifications. The light was soft, spilling through new curtains I'd picked out myself. No one else's taste, no subtle compromises disguised as cooperation. Just mine. It had been 3 weeks since the settlement. 3 weeks of waking up without his shadow stretched across my day. The house I chose wasn't grand. A small townhouse near the park, with creaky steps and a stubborn radiator. But it was quiet. It was mine. Every room felt like breathing. I found peace in small rituals, lighting a candle before bed, choosing music that matched my mood, leaving dishes in the sink without judgment. There was no one to sigh dramatically or joke about how I always forget to rinse properly. And slowly, I began to realize how deeply those sighs had shaped me. How many parts of myself I had chipped away just to keep the air calm. He sent one last message the day after I moved in. "I saw your new place. Looks lonely." I didn't respond. But I stared at that word lonely and let myself feel the full weight of its intention. He didn't mean empty. He meant unchosen. He meant, "I hope you regret this." It was another attempt to plant doubt. Another stone tossed in my direction. What he didn't understand, what he still couldn't grasp, was that I had been lonely with him for years. Lonely while cooking dinner for two. Lonely while laughing at his jokes when no one else would. Lonely in a shared bed, memorizing the shape of a man who was already half gone. This loneliness, the one I felt now, was clean. It didn't ask me to prove myself. It didn't punish me for needing. It was mine. And I wasn't afraid of it. I unpacked slowly. Each box revealed more than objects. It revealed choices I'd once made for someone else. His books, which I'd packed up and labeled with precision, I donated them. His framed art, the one he bought to impress a client, I left it on the curb. The throw blanket he insisted on, even though I hated the fabric, I gave it to a shelter. Not out of spite, out of space. Out of respect for the version of myself that would no longer bend just to make someone else more comfortable. I folded clothing I hadn't worn in years because he didn't like certain colors. I rediscovered the sweater I loved, the one he said made me look too serious. I wore it for 3 days straight. Just because I could. Even in small things, I felt the shedding of a skin I had outgrown long ago. Then came the letter. Not from him. From a patient's daughter. One I hadn't heard from in over a year. She wrote, "You probably don't remember me. You sat with my mother during her final days. No one else had time. You held her hand while she slept. She wasn't alone." And that meant everything. The letter was short. Just a few paragraphs. But I held it like a lifeline. Because for so long, my value had been invisible. Measured only by how useful I was to the people closest to me, and only when it benefited them. This letter didn't ask for anything. It didn't expect a reply. It just saw me. Not as a wife. Not as support. Just as me. I read it twice that night, then placed it on my fridge with a simple magnet. Proof that I mattered, even when no one applauded. And then, he tried again. A voicemail this time. His voice low, tired. "I miss you. I didn't realize how much until everything got quiet. I made mistakes. But you're punishing me. You're not this person." That last line lingered. You're not this person. It was his final weapon, doubt. The suggestion that by choosing myself, I had become someone unrecognizable. But the truth was simpler. He had only ever seen the version of me that served him. Now that I was no longer in service, I looked like a stranger. I listened to his voice not once, but twice, and realized it didn't move me anymore. There was no sting, just distance. What used to pierce now barely brushed the surface. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. I kept it, not to revisit the pain, but to remember how far I'd come. To remember that his voice, once so familiar, no longer carried weight. It was just sound. Like static on a station I'd finally tuned out. The final stage wasn't anger. It was grief. Not for him, but for myself, for the years I'd lost trying to be enough. For the ways I'd shaped myself around someone who didn't notice. For every holiday I hosted, every gift I wrapped with care, every kind word that floated into a void. I let myself mourn. Not dramatically. Quietly. With tea. With journals. With early mornings when the light felt too tender to touch. I thought of the times I'd curled up beside him in bed, hoping for warmth. And how often he'd rolled away, without a word. I had blamed myself for that distance. For not being softer, sexier, simpler. I had convinced myself that love was maintenance. That it was my job to carry all the weight. To be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he offered. And through that grief came a quiet truth. I didn't need an apology to heal. I didn't need him to see what he lost. I just needed to see myself again. I went back to the tarot reader. The same velvet table. The same deck. She smiled when she saw me. "You've changed." "I think I've returned," I said. She nodded and pulled 3 cards. Death. The Star. The World. I exhaled. She looked at me and said, "You've already done the hard part." And I believed her. Because leaving was hard. But staying would have broken me. That night, I lit a candle and opened the windows. Let the spring air in. Let everything else out. I made no announcements. No posts. No declarations. But inside me, something settled. I was not bitter. I was not broken. I was simply done. And in the soft light of that evening, alone but not lost, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. And then something else. Not joy. Not yet, but the quiet possibility of it. The hum of life that didn't center around him. The thrill of rearranging furniture just because I felt like it. The comfort of my own company. And maybe, just maybe, the realization that choosing myself wasn't just a recovery. It was a beginning.